Hi, thank you for joining us. And we would like to take you through a talk that we had intended to give at Code for America Summit. And we are thankful to Code for America for providing us this opportunity to share this content still virtually. We're going to be talking about slowing down Agile to government speed and bringing the whole team along. Later in this presentation, Shannon McHarg will be taking over. She is a UX designer at the Department of the Interior. I'm Jennifer Malcolm, and I am a product manager. This is a screenshot of the website that we have been managing for around 2 years now. And it is a website that provides open data and contextual information for energy and mineral resources that are produced on federal and Native American lands. Even those of us in the government who are often behind by many years have mostly heard the phrase, the strategy is delivery. Or its variant, delivery is the strategy. It's a useful phrase because bureaucracy is a real thing. I'm sure those of us in the government have experienced it. More than likely, those in large or medium-sized companies also have. It can stop you from accomplishing things that you feel are useful or important. And at times, bureaucracy can cause us to not meet the expectations of the public. So this phrase, the strategy is delivery, reminds us that we need to be producing results for the people. So delivery is important. But what happens if we have our sole focus on delivery and that impedes our ability to scope the features properly? That means we're not delivering the right thing. We might be delivering, but we're not delivering the best product that we could. Or results in a siloed team where everyone is working on their own things, throwing things over the wall. Or we fail to consult with subject matter experts who could have helped us get to a better place faster. So we are talking about this because our team recently had some of these issues. So those 3 last slides detailed what we thought we were facing in our implementation of Agile and what we needed to work on. So we decided we need to find a better way to properly scope our features, prioritize our work, and get more collaboration among the whole team. But still not lose sight of the fact that we need to ship something, we need to deliver something to the public and to the site users. So we will get into our solution to the problems that we felt we were having. But first, to give you some context, I'd like to just give you a glance at what our team looks like. So we have a product manager, that's me currently. We have a UX designer, that is Shannon. We also used to have a content strategist. We had a great content strategist for about 2 years, and he recently went to join 18F. But I want to give a shout out to Ryan Johnson because he was actually the reason that we started looking at Basecamp's book. And also, he put together a lot of these slides for you today. We also have 3 developers. We have 1 who is a government employee and 2 who are contract staff. We were able to get them for a while in order to be able to ship some stuff faster that our department leadership wanted to see. And we have 2 program analysts on the team, and they came to the team without a lot of digital experience, but they have a lot of knowledge about honors business and the data that we are providing on the site. So they are an essential component of the team. And here we are going to go through what our process looked like before we did our reevaluation and changed some things up. So we did work in 2-week sprints, pretty typical. We had a sprint planning meeting, stand-ups every day, a demo and review at the end of the sprint, as well as 2 sync-ups on a weekly basis. So we would use those sprint planning meetings to divvy up work for individuals each sprint, and we would get as much as we could in that sprint while still trying to do user research, design, content strategy. We would try to break it up to something that at least would be accomplishable within that sprint. And we did do some longer term planning. We had roadmap meetings every 6 weeks, backlog grooming every 4 weeks. And we also did design studios when we were working on a big problem or a redesign of a feature or a page. And that would happen for 1 or 2 days and usually be in person. So we're an Agile team, so there's nothing more Agile than being Agile about our process, right? So with what we thought were problems, we said, okay, what can we do about it? How can we switch things up to make it better? So we decided to mix it up a little bit. So in order to identify what we needed to work on, we held a retro on our existing processes, the meetings we held, the way that we assigned work. Basically, everything was on the table in that retro session, which actually was multiple sessions to get through everything. So we went through a retro process that was similar to the ones we do on a sprint basis. And we also wanted to take the time to make sure we understood what things were working and what we should continue and celebrate our successes. So here's a list of some of the things we thought were working well or we didn't want to change much. Generally, the team liked working in 2-week sprints and felt that it gave us a good amount of time to actually get something done. We also have a lot of remote team members, so daily stand-ups were very popular among the team, and we wanted to continue those to make sure we had a time every day to connect with the whole team. And we felt that our retro process was effective at people sharing the problems that they had experienced and the team coming up with action items, ways to address those problems. So we also had multiple team members, not just our content strategists, getting involved in improving the content on the site. So that was important and it was working well. We were performing user research and that was helping us understand the user's needs. And we were using prototypes to test some options with users before spending the time to build them, which was important because during the beginning year or more of our team, we only had 1 developer and we had limited capacity to actually build things. And we had to take some credit. We had to celebrate the fact that we had made a lot of improvements over the 1.5 years or so that our team had been together, to the tech stack, to the code, addressed some tech debt, and also made improvements to the user experience. We had addressed multiple things that we had found were problems for users. So we had made progress and we wanted to make sure that we noted that and celebrated our successes on that front. And we had started training and co-working quite a bit with our program analysts to teach them both user research and content management skills. But we thought that we had some problems with our long-term thinking, with our strategic thinking as a team. So the problems that we felt were essential to figure out were that often those 2-week chunks kept us focusing on that and at expense of the longer term and building a consensus around that direction and the problem that we were solving. Additionally, despite the 2-week sprints being a good time that we could get something done, things would come up or we had scoped incorrectly, and we often ended up rolling things over from one sprint to the next, which largely defeats the purpose of the sprint. And we didn't feel that the road mapping and the sprint planning were as connected as we'd like to see them. The road mapping was a high-level look, but it wasn't as detailed enough to get us all on the same page of where we were going and all be on the same page when we came to sprint planning. We also had to produce a project plan for upper management, and our content strategist produced a content calendar, which was a very useful resource, but we didn't think that we were using those 3 resources in a cohesive manner. And one of the biggest issues, we didn't necessarily have a shared understanding of what our priorities should be. And along the same lines, we had some collaboration and communication problems that we noted during the process. And this first one just ties into the last one from the last page. We often didn't have a shared understanding of the problem space, and that's probably what led to a difference of opinions on what our priorities should be. And we didn't get the whole team's experience and expertise involved in evaluating everything and scoping our work as much as we really wanted to. And that push to deliver, that drive to finish something in 2 weeks, led to, at times, not enough iteration during the design and the development process, not enough space for changing and creating during the process. So moving too fast led to, as I had mentioned earlier, throwing things over the wall, one team member doing the design in one sprint, throwing it over to the developer, and very little collaboration and interaction between those people during the design and build processes. And unfortunately, it may be an issue that you never fully get away from, but we did have requests from leadership that took precedence over the way that we would typically work or what we had previously determined were our top goals or priorities for the product. So one of our team members, our content strategist, during our whole evaluation process, had found this book, which became our inspiration for reevaluating our process and trying something new. So the book is Shape Up, Stop Running in Circles, and Ship Work That Matters. And it is free from Basecamp at the link below for those who would like to look at it. Now, a lot of the slides, illustrations, and examples that you'll see coming up are from that book. So we thank Basecamp for allowing us to use those. They were our inspiration for our evaluation process and what we tried to do. So we thank you. So what is shaping? And that's our interpretation after reading the book. Basecamp, probably you'll get more information if you take a look at that book. But it's essentially taking something abstract and putting some guardrails around it, having something more concrete. But it's not the point where you've got every detail on how something will be built. It's a concept of where you're going, and it's more concrete than when you started, but it's not the final product. This is from the Basecamp book, and it illustrates how they used shaping. And they had 2 separate teams, one building, one shaping, and each of those chunks of work would get divided up into 6 weeks with an additional 2 weeks of bedding. So we implemented it in a different way, which Shannon may go into more, but we do not have the resources. We have a small team So we have one team doing the shaping and the building, and they're not happening concurrently like this shows Basecamp was doing. Bedding, you can look at the book for more details, but that was a process of determining what should get worked on next, what should get built next. So shaping is taking that raw idea or request, shaping it into a pitch, and bedding. So that is where the teams would basically sell their shaped pitch, and then as a whole, the teams would decide, okay, what is going to be the best use of our building resources coming up. And so then after something went to be built, then the scopes would be mapped out and then checked off. So here's some properties from the book of shaping. It's rough. Everyone can tell that you have not got a finished product, but then there's room to be creative throughout the process of building and designing. So you don't have a detailed prototype after you're done with shaping something. But everyone also feels that you've solved the problem. You've got the concept that's going to solve the problem you intended to solve to begin with. And the last property is that it's bounded. So we know about what we're doing. There's room to shape that more, to get into the details during the process. But we also know what we're not going to do. And that all revolves around this concept of appetite. And essentially, appetite is determining, based on the problem, how much resources you should devote to solving that problem, rather than coming up with a solution and saying how much resource or how many resources will you need to implement that solution. You say, okay, in order to solve this problem for our users or whomever, we are going to devote 6 weeks. That's essentially what an appetite is. And then you shape the solution around the appetite. Here's a quote from Basecamp's book that we found rather useful in describing the benefits of the properties of shaping. Taken together, the roughness leaves room for the team to resolve all the details, while the solution and boundaries act like guardrails. They reduce risk and channel the team's efforts, making sure they don't build too much, wander around, or get stuck. So you're allowing flexibility and creativity throughout the full design and development process, while not allowing you to get on a totally different road or to the point where you go off and expand the scope greatly and end up delivering something way late or not delivering the intended solution at all. So after going through our retro process and getting inspiration from ShapeUp, we decided there were some things in that book that we thought we could use in our own way or just implement to help us solve some of our problems. We wanted to continue with our 2-week sprints because our team found them useful, but we wanted to make sure to put more emphasis on our epics or our longer term goals or our solutions as a whole. And in the book, they use 6-week cycles as showed on the diagram earlier. We wanted to shape the work by bringing everyone around the table to define the work, but using an appropriate level of abstraction that allowed for learnings and adjustments throughout the full design and development process. So this is from ShapeUp. First, we work in 6-week cycles. 6 weeks is long enough to build something meaningful, start to finish, and short enough that everyone can feel the deadline looming from the start, so they use the time wisely. We are using epics. We've discovered a lot of features we were working on were better viewed through a longer time frame than the 2-week sprints. And we were using a roadmap, already looking at a 6-week horizon, but we weren't as focused on that roadmap as we were the sprints. And as we mentioned, rolling over a lot of our tasks from one sprint to the next. So putting more emphasis on the epics helped us to identify trade-offs and better coordinate our work and identify blockages or dependencies. And we can better manage our metabolism of the work by breaking down our epics into our 2-week sprints and thus maintain both time frames in a useful way. This is a screenshot of our roadmap in ZenHub, and it shows you how we're employing epics. We are using epics for every 6-week chunk where we break down our work, and we are also using epics for the longer term things. We cannot fit everything useful, everything that we need to do into 6 weeks because of our limited resources and competing goals coming from other parts of the organization, as well as our team just took on another website to manage. So anyway, we do meet every 6 weeks. As you see, the epic Fig Newton at the top is a 6-week long chunk of work. We determine what's the larger goals within that 6 weeks, and then those flow down into the sprint planning. But some of the things, like our second thing on that roadmap, Explore Data, are actually very large projects, months long in order to accomplish. We decided we had a months-long appetite to solve this problem because it was a very significant problem for our users. So that is not going to be done in 6 weeks, but each 6 weeks we meet to determine what part of that Explore Data epic can be done in the next 6 weeks. So we use epics for both that 6-week chunk as well as the longer term projects. So we're going to go into a little bit more the case study on how we used shaping. And for that, I am going to pass this off to Shannon McHarg.
I'm Shannon McHarg. I'm the user experience designer on the team. I'm going to take you through a case study of how we've used the shaping process. So to reiterate, this is, or to recap from what Jennifer told you, this is Basecamp's shaping steps. So they go through shaping where they set the appetite, narrow the problem, outline the solution, remove rabbit holes and write the pitch. Then they get into their build process with a separate team that scopes it, builds it, and shows progress. For us, we did it a little bit differently because we only have one team. And this is what our version of the shaping process looks like. For phase one, we defined the project scope where we started with a raw idea, understood the problem, narrowed it down, and determined how much time we were willing to spend on it. We then generated ideas by sketching and reviewing them and narrowing down the options. Then we grounded it in reality where we poked holes and reviewed them as a team and chose what option to move forward with. Then we scoped it for build where we broke down the work into an initial list of pieces or scopes and this determined the order of the work that we would be doing. And then we started building it and we're now down to the part where we're deciding what will be good enough to be considered done. So for phase one, defining the project scope, the key things are to define the problem and figure out how much time and energy you're willing to put into solving that problem. So for the raw idea, we knew we wanted to do something to fix our Explore Data page because we knew it kept cropping up as a problem in user interviews, particularly for storytellers, which is one of our user types, which is our proxy for personas. They include more than one user group. So our storytellers are people like journalists and academics who are looking at our data to figure out what the story is telling is and then presenting it in some way, whether it's an article or a report or a graphic or something to tell what's going on to other people. So our current page looks like this, and you can see it's a long scrolling page that is really hard for users to understand what's going on and to parse what's there to understand the story. So we knew we wanted to fix that for users. Then going into the the problem solving meeting that we had, I had kind of looked at all of the data we had so far from user interviews and other sources and come up with a raw idea. So the idea I had at the beginning was that storytellers want the ability to visually explore the data, and the current Explore data page doesn't serve the needs of those users. They have difficulty understanding what's available on the page, often get lost in the scrolling, and some of the visualizations are difficult to understand. And with the addition of, these are some new features we had added, the queries, data query tool, homepage graphs, and monthly data, we now had several ways to interact with the data, and we needed to make them all fit well together so that users could easily go back and forth between the different types and levels of data. We reviewed our background information all together in the meeting. So we looked at how storytellers use the site. So this is kind of how we do our user types, is we put everybody we talk to on these triangles, and these are the people that came out as storytellers that we've talked to. The light orange are actual people that we've talked to. The dark orange is where the kind of the average of them all is, and the one with the dashed line is where we initially thought they would be based off of what we thought before we started talking to people and asking them or placing them on the triangles. Their goals are usually to understand what's happening with natural resources, learn from the data whether there's a story to tell, and uncover any stories found, and then flesh out the story with information from multiple sources and tell the story in a compelling way. We know there are pain points about being able to understand both the detailing and the bigger picture, so being able to bounce back and forth between those, trusting that the information presented is unbiased, knowing where to go next to find related data, so if they're like trying to follow a thread to a story, understand how the data ties to legislation, and understand how the data fits with other sources of data. We'd also looked at, we had done an exercise to look at all of the questions we've gotten about our data to kind of categorize them by user type. Storytellers tend to be the ones least likely to respond to us or ask us questions, so we have a low number of respondents here, but those are the kinds of questions that we know that they have about our data. I also put together scenarios and journey maps based off of everything we knew that looked at their thoughts and feelings, actions and touch points, and kind of flowed out how they would go through our site, the existing site. And I also had a click through of what it looked like, and pulled in analytics of like how many people actually went through these paths. So then after we reviewed all the data, all the raw idea and the background data, we narrowed down the problem to something we could all agree to was the problem. And we used these questions to kind of flesh out what we thought the actual problem we should be solving is. So our refined problem statement was that storytellers know main learners, we added in a second user type, want the ability to visually explore trends and get an overview of the data and how it connects to the resource extraction and regulatory process and other pieces of the site, and the current site doesn't serve the needs of those users. We know that on the current site, users have difficulty understanding what data is available, often get lost in the scrolling. Some of the visualizations are difficult to understand. They often expect the graphs to be interactive and drill into details, and it doesn't tie in well with the how it works content to provide context. So once we narrowed down that problem, we thought about how much time and effort we wanted to put into a solution. This is the concept of an appetite that Basecamp uses. So we all kind of collectively gave numbers that we thought it was worth, and using these questions, we kind of arrived at a number. We decided that the appetite for fixing this problem was 6 sprints worth of resources. So that's not, our sprints are 2 weeks, so it's 12 weeks worth of resources, but not necessarily getting it done in 12 weeks. We wanted to be able to spend that many resources in addition to everything else we have to do as a team. So it's taken way longer than 12 weeks, but that's how much we wanted to put into it. So once we narrowed down the problem, we then moved into sketching solutions. So I kind of introduced this concept at the end of the problem definition meeting, where we wanted to sketch solutions that could be done within the appetite that we had outlined. So we then went offline and all sketched separately different ways of solving the problem within the stated appetite. So we wanted to make sure people were doing it at the right level of detail, so not getting too stuck in the details, and just kind of demonstrating, what it should be doing and not necessarily how it's doing it. So the questions we wanted to answer were where in the current system does the new thing fit? How do you get to it? What are the key components or interactions? And where does it take you? So we all got back together to review what we came up with. And these are some sketches that came out of that first round of sketching. So this is a very high level that shows a map with graphs and tables and things. another version that was kind of similar. And then this was a great one where, being able to sketch offline allowed people to use whatever tool works well for them, and there wasn't the pressure of having to like sketch in front of people that you sometimes get in a design studio. So this was one of my colleagues who just used Word to like demonstrate their idea, and I thought it was great that they were able to use whatever tool they were comfortable with to get the ideas out of their heads. So we got more ideas on the table than we would have in a traditional in-person design studio. And I should say that we did this all remotely. We are a 100% remote team, so this is something you can all do tomorrow. We had, at the end of the sketching, we had intended on using ShapeUp's concept of bedding, but that didn't work because we were working within a single problem that we had all agreed was a problem. So it wasn't like we needed to compare different things to say which ones we thought we should fix because we had already agreed on a problem. So instead, we decided to list out the features of the concepts we had come up with, and then we voted on which ones we thought best solved the problem that we had agreed to. So this was our ranked feature list where we each put pluses on the things that we had identified as features, and we then decided to do a second round of sketching based off of what was most important and using all the features that we were highest ranked at solving the problem. So we got back together after doing that second round of sketching to review with. And these are some sketches from the second round where you're starting to see it gets a little bit more refined. And that they're using those features from that list and getting more into like the details of like what those graphs are that are below the map and things like that. So then we narrowed it down to one option. We all liked this option, and of like having a map that you can click on things and then it like drives what's down below. And it was loosely based off of this great website that the Eviction Lab put together, where you're clicking on the map and then you get cards with more detail below. So once we had selected that option, we worked on grounding it in reality. So it's about finding holes or unanswered questions and answering anything that would prevent the team from getting stuck or wasting time later, so that we can keep it within the appetite once we get into build, instead of encountering those things later that when they can be hairier. Because we all it takes is one hole in the concept to derail it from fitting into that appetite. So we reviewed each of the selected designs offline. We each reviewed the selected design offline to poke holes into it and use our particular lenses to come up with poke holes in it and answer questions and bring up new questions and things. And we wanted to evaluate how well it solved the problem. So we brought up the original problem that we had agreed to and the appetite, so that it would all be fresh in mind before we did that. So the questions we were trying to answer were, is it possible within the time frames? Did we miss anything? Are we making technical assumptions that aren't fair? Does it require new technical work we've never done before? Are we making assumptions about how the parts fit together? Is there a hard decision we should settle in advance so it doesn't trip up the team? Are there pieces of the solution that aren't necessary to solve the problem? And what else do we need to learn? So after we all kind of looked at the questions from our particular lenses, or the solution from our particular lenses, we got together to review the findings. And this is what we came up with. So we basically put it in a matrix, we all put in our comments, and then we plussed things that we agreed with, and we had named all of our concepts so that we could easily refer to them in these notes. So then we solidified the features of the option we wanted to move forward with based off of all of the hole poking that we had done. And in the shape-up process, they recommend creating a pitch document to get everyone who will be building the feature up to speed on the decisions already made. But because we had all already been in the room and were familiar with it, we felt confident that we didn't need to do that. So instead, and because it's the same team that's building it, so instead I created a high-level prototype that had all of the features so that we wouldn't forget about things we wanted to put into it. And it was just an actual prototype that I made sketchy so that we weren't too tied to any of the details, but it just kind of had the high level of like, okay, yes, we want to have all of the data types and the commodity. You want to be able to select commodities and the time frame and cards and having things below it. And these are the types of things we might have below it, but not spending too much time on any of the details. So then we took that and worked on scoping it for building. So we organized everything into scopes that are organized by structure, not by person. So it's like, what features are we going to do? and functions that can be done in working pieces that can be completed in a few days or less. And so what we did was we made one GitHub issue for each scope, and then with the understanding that we break it into smaller issues if we determined it couldn't fit. And we started with some of the most important things so that we were leaving the easiest and least important stuff for last. So like we knew the map was big, so we wanted to start with that. And we'd actually already started building a prototype of the maps for revenue, so we decided to start with fleshing out revenue, then adding in production and disbursements to the other data sets, because we knew once we figured it out for one data set, it would be easier to add the others, and then hook it up to the rest of the site. Among all of this, we ended up figuring out that we needed to build a database to make all of this work, so we've essentially had to rebuild the whole site in the process. So it's taking more time, but it's actually allowing us to get a lot more out of the site in addition to just the Explore data. So then we moved into the build process. We started with getting one piece done, and then as we've been going, we've been refactoring the scripts. And we're in the process of defining done. We're really close to being able to launch it. So the concept of getting one piece done is to identify something core, small, and novel that can be used to show progress and solve a key problem for us. That was the map. And then build the steps to get the piece you're started with. So this was our first iteration of the map. It was great. And it really showed progress and allowed people to say, hey, this is going to be great when we're done with it. So then as we've been going, we've been identifying tasks for each scope and adjusting the list as unknowns become known and as we're learning more. So this was an early version of our ZenHub board that had, a lot of like high level things that we needed to do, and they weren't all prioritized at the time. But as we figured out as we've been defining what needs to be done, we are like flagging nice to haves and comparing against a baseline instead of an ideal perfect to determine like, can we flip the switch and go to the new version of the site. So this is a more recent one that has like everything prioritized. So like all of the P2 highs are things that we need to have done before we launch. Though we are now talking about doing a soft launch, so that may change a little bit. So things like SEO might not need to be done right away. So this is where we are today as we're building it. We're really close to being able to launch, but you can see it's iterated quite a bit from that first map. And we now have, selectors that you can pick things. And then we've got charts below. You can see there's still a few bugs in it, but we're getting there. We've got, cards that you've picked, and then we've got some summaries that are at the nationwide level. That's where we're at today. So what did we learn from this process? We did a retro at the end of the kind of initial design phase once we had scoped everything to build. These were things that we came out that could be better. We had no in-person components. We're going to try to have at least one in-person day next time, depending on what's going on with COVID. It was a big problem with lots to consider, like we bit off more than we could chew. So we're going to try to on a smaller problem next time and kind of flesh out the process more. It was less collaborative than when we all spend a day in a design studio. So we're going to try to do more pairing for the sketching. I had offered it as an option, but nobody did it. I think we might end up with some really cool solutions if we do that next time. It was also hard to find the right balance between having everyone dedicated to a full day or two versus spreading things out to allow time for thinking through things. It's hard to make work with everyone's schedules, so we're going to have to find the right balance of doing that. It was nice to have it spread out over 4 weeks so that everyone could think through sketches and poking holes. And it really helped people to bring up things that they normally wouldn't if they felt pressured in a design studio, which helps bring the whole team along. But it was hard to find time across 4 weeks when everyone could be there. So it's something we'll need to think about. And then our estimates still aren't fully accurate. And part of it was because it was such a big problem that we chewed off and it required the database. And so it's been hard to keep to scope and we've had to reprioritize a lot, but we'll have to figure that out as we do this for other projects in the future. That's all we have. And I hope you enjoyed this.